Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great day. This is your host, Jamie Clarkson. Let's find your major. Today, we're here with my friend Kennedy. Through her major, she has been able to advocate for those in need, understand the stages of aging through psychology, and observe the social and cultural elements of human interaction. So, welcome, Kennedy.
Hi.
Hey, it's nice to have you.
Great to be here.
So, let's start off. What's your major?
My major is Child and Family Studies, and my concentration within that major is Child, Adult, and Family.
Oh, awesome.
Yep.
So, before we continue on with our interview, and I like to say this in every episode, you've only ever gone to OU, so you have your experience, and it's not necessarily a universal experience, but you are going to be speaking, to your own experience. So if anybody's listening and wants to pursue something like this, but decides to go somewhere else, your experience may vary.
Yes.
But with that, moving on, I like to begin the interview asking kind of end game questions.
Sure.
So a lot of people, when they choose what they want to study, they want to know what jobs they're going to end up getting. So what are some of the jobs that you can get?
Sure. So obviously, Child and Family Studies, you can get a lot of my major tends to get confused with social work because
Right.
a lot of the same things that you can get with a social work degree, you can get with a Family Studies degree.
Okay.
So you can be a caseworker. You can be a child protective caseworker. A lot of our alumni personally have gone there.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also do things like work at nonprofits.
Right.
So, for example, you can work at a women's shelter,
Mm-hmm.
or you can work at a child advocacy center. That's where I work right now.
Yeah.
A lot of things you might not expect to work with is victim advocates. So victim advocates are usually court appointed to either the family or a child that is going through the legal system.
Mm-hmm.
So you will be basically the liaison between the attorney and the child or the family. So you'll be expected to potentially meet with the child if they're incarcerated, meet with them, help them understand where in the legal process they are, and basically be their voice within a legal team.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of criminal justice things that you would think would never
Right.
be a CFS thing, you can totally do with CFS.
Mm-hmm. So, you're talking a lot about advocating and then, talking to all different types of people. So it's a very people-based job.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Which would definitely appeal to a certain demographic,
Yeah.
but yeah. As far as those jobs go, are those jobs that you have to relocate for, or can you stay in your hometown to do them?
So what's really cool is if you want to stay in your hometown, there's
Right.
absolutely a job there for you. If we're being real, the turnover rate at Child Protective Services anywhere is very high, and it's because they need people there that want to be there and are able to time manage because caseloads are usually crazy. But those are at every county, so you could do that. There's a lot of nonprofits everywhere. It just takes a little bit of research. But yeah, what I didn't mention is you can also work with older populations.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, you can work at nursing homes,
Oh.
which are usually located at least close to home.
Right.
You can also work with, I really want to do an internship or possibly work at a veterans hospital. So I'd love to work for the VA. That's a pro tip because then you get benefits and all that good stuff.
Right.
So yeah.
That's awesome. So, one thing when I was looking it up is a lot of places mention grad school. Is grad school necessary if you want to choose this path?
In a word, no.
Okay.
You can totally get a job that is awesome with just a bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm.
We had an alumni. He works at Nationwide Children's Hospital, which if there are listeners that are not from Ohio, that's a really, really highly respected children's hospital in Columbus. And he's actually a behavior analyst there, which is actually, they called for a psychology degree. But he was like, hey, I have a child and family studies major, which means I've specifically studied child development and child brain development and trauma. So I think I'd be really qualified for this. So you can apply for jobs that a psych major could apply for. It's really all about looking for what you want and making it work, because at the end of the day, CFS is a very like, I want to say it can mold into a lot of different like careers. So I'm going to grad school just because I want to learn more, and I want more like, I guess, niche things. It's really funny. I'm getting a master's. I want to get my master's in social work just because I want to do counseling, but I also want to have the opportunity, if I wanted to be like a forensic interviewer at a nonprofit or at a child advocacy center.
What's a forensic interviewer?
So my internship is at the Athens County Child Advocacy Center, and what a CAC is basically like one location. So we're only working on cases of child sexual abuse.
Right.
So like it's a trauma-informed like initiative. So CACs have a nurse that's like specifically for child sexual assault. We have a forensic interviewer who's actually the only person, well, usually it's what we want, because we don't want the child to have to tell their story multiple times. Otherwise, it's not trauma-informed care. But the forensic interviewer is the person that is asking what happened. And when you like, if you were ever to see an interview, in the other room is the MDT, which is the multidisciplinary team. So you have the caseworker, you have we have a sheriff here that only works with sexual assault cases. And then we have like a whole bunch of other people like counselors, psychologists, whatever the child is, like whatever team the child has currently, they all meet together. So the forensic interviewer is in charge of getting all the information that they need in order to make a case and prosecute the alleged perpetrator. So, yeah.
Interesting. I had never heard of that like at all before.
Yeah. CACs, this is like a
no, yeah,
fun
keep
fact.
going.
CACs actually didn't come into effect until like the 1980s. So like it's still like it's still like a relatively new thing. Like that's why a lot of them are like grant funded, because it's so new that like federally and like statewide there's usually not funding because they just don't know what it is.
And I know for you specifically, you keep talking about like working with people who have faced trauma and, you know, handling that. Is that something that somebody with this degree kind of has to work with? Is it all based in trauma, or are there other options?
So you absolutely do not have to just work with trauma people. There's other avenues you could go. I strongly encourage anyone that wants to do CFS or is even mildly interested in working with older adults to please do that, because a lot of the jobs within a nursing home that you could get, if you like to work with people, but you also like to kind of be in charge, like low key, that's me. But you can be like a programs coordinator at a nursing home. So you'll be in charge of like field trips, making sure everybody is like happy in their home. It's like improving their lives within a nursing home or a community. That's something you could do.
Yeah.
It's not like you don't have to do like just, oh, I'm with traumatized people at all times. Like you totally don't have to do that. But the older population is growing a lot. Like I want to say there's more older people. There's like in the next 25 years, there's going to be more older people than younger people. So it's like a really booming industry. And I highly recommend anyone that like doesn't necessarily want to work with like tougher, I guess like, it would be like tougher, more challenging populations. If they want to work with the older population and just kind of want to improve their life, I would say that's a good avenue.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a lot of different kind of targets you can go for, a lot of different routes, very specific routes. Do you have to tailor your education to that specifically, or can you get this general education and then still go down a specific route?
So specifically at Ohio University, there's actually 3 concentrations you can do.
Yeah.
So the first one is child life. So that's actually very specific. A child life specialist only works in hospitals and works with children. So they're in charge of making sure that medication's getting given to them. They're kind of like a victim advocate, but it's like within the medical field. So trying to help the kid figure out, like, understand what's happening, because like a 4-year-old is not going to understand what chemo is.
Right.
So that's kind of like what they would be doing. So that's very specific, and those classes you would see they're like very, very specialized. Mine is like for people that like the major but don't really want to like commit themselves yet to anything. So child, adult, and family, you're going to get a lot of different classes. I've taken a gerontology class, which is the study of older adults. I've taken child development classes. That's pretty much like widespread throughout the major. Even if you're like a gerontology, like if you're that track, I'm pretty sure you have to take a child like development class. I've also taken a stress and trauma class, which is fabulous.
Right.
That like really is not even focused really on any population. It's just kind of like in general, here's how the body deals with stress. So that's really helpful. Our last concentration is family gerontology. So that's a lot more of like older adult population, family along the lifespan in regards to older adults. So yeah, like if you were like wanting to learn like as much as possible without like committing, like if you're not sure where you want to go yet, I would say child, adult, and family is the best because you get like a like lifespan look at everything from beginning to end.
Yeah, and I guess there's a benefit there too because you're not kind of digging yourself into a hole if you're not like fully committed to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then the child development thing, that's very interesting because I think that's really beneficial to anybody who's working in any field similar to this.
Yeah, and it's like the child development classes, let's just have full disclosure. I did not want to work with kids at all.
Yeah.
And I'm working at a child advocacy center. So
that's how things work out.
Yeah, that's just how it works out sometimes.
Yeah.
Child development courses are actually really helpful for things that you might not think they're helpful for. So, for example, I think that child development courses, if I were to ever to apply to a job at, say, nowadays what's really popular rather than nursing homes is actually retirement communities.
Right.
So I would say if I was applying for a job at a retirement community, I'd be like, well, I'm taking child development classes and I can help our older adults that are now parents. There's an opioid crisis going on right now. And a lot of the times the grandparents are taking on the roles of being parents again. Yeah. So that's really valuable information for people that have not been parents in a minute. Like, it's very valuable information. So things like that you'd be like, I don't need this. It's like, maybe you need it.
So we've kind of touched on some of the classes that you would be taking for this particular major.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of kind of psychology-based classes. Yeah. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a lot of the same classes. It's not the same class, but like similar classes are very like psychology based. But I took child psychology just so I could get like, I don't know. I took the child psych just because I was like, I can't get into the child development class for CFS. So I took it, and theirs is much more like, I don't want to say factual. It was just very like dry, and you're not looking at the whole person. Right. So the biggest thing that you'll learn if you're a CFS major is you need to look at the whole person. So it would be like, yes, this person has ADD and this, like, he seems annoying. He's 5 years old. He's bouncing off the walls. He's disruptive. And it's like, okay, but his clothes are also like, he's been wearing the same pair of clothes for 2 days, or he's been wearing, like, he's also seems a little bit like nervous around his sister, like stuff like that. You got to like look at the whole person. So you take 2 classes. It's middle childhood, which is entirely focused between the ages of 6 and 12. And then you'll take adolescence, which is just a lovely time. You get to learn about puberty again and get to talk about your own adolescence. Right. But it's really, really nice because you actually take those one after the other. So you're not taking adolescence before middle childhood, typically. You'll be taking things so that you're literally starting when you start the major at birth, and then you end at older adults. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool. And it's like helpful because it keeps it all in your brain. Like, my brain gets scattered real easy. Right. So it's like, oh no, I forgot that this happens here instead of here.
Right. And besides the psychology-based courses, what other kind of courses do you take?
So I take families along the lifespan. So we talk about different family structures. We talk about divorce, like tough topics. We also talk about blended families. So this could be non-traditional families. So same-sex parents. It could be foster kids. It could be adoption. And just the challenges and also the strengths of that, because when you're out in the field, you're going to meet many different kinds of families. And the whole point of taking that class is being able, like, even if the family looks like they're a disaster. It's because they're also a family in crisis.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, they're like really having a hard time, but all at the same time they're here because they're in crisis, and you have to. It's a strengths-based approach. It's like, okay, well, at least they're all able to still laugh together and be in the same room with each other.
Right.
So that's kind of how that class goes. Let me think of another one. Don't have to take this class, but it's a CFS class. It's called Interprofessional Gerontology.
Mm-hmm.
So that one's about rural populations, rural older adult populations. So it was like an Appalachia class.
Yeah.
So you get to learn about the difference between working with rural older adults versus urban, which is, you don't really think of it being any different, but it's extremely different. So it's basically about like working with, okay, well, we only have one hospital in the area that could handle ischemic strokes.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to get this person there? It's like a lot of like, our professor would make up cases for us, and we would have to work around what they had. So a lot of rural older adults they're typically either living just with a spouse, or they have like 3 generations under one roof, and they have one car. So it's kind of like, how can we make this work versus if they lived in the city where they could have public transportation.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting.
Yeah.
The health, like, and you actually go into like, if you're interested more into like health and public health stuff, it also goes into that realm. So we talk about like diabetes is a big deal, especially in rural America, and that's just because there's food deserts.
Mm-hmm.
So food deserts is basically like, you're not like, there's a Family Dollar, and that's where you can get food, and that's not nutritious food. So if that's the only place that you can get food, unless you drive an hour to go to Walmart, I mean, that's kind of what's going to happen.
It's Walmart.
Exactly.
There's not always the biggest selection. And I know in the area we go to school in particular is very kind of bad for this. You know, maybe not the town that we live in specifically. Athens is, Athens is pretty okay. We're on a good track. But there is kind of this region, next town over type of thing, that I remember hearing an NPR story about this town where it was easier to get heroin than it was to get like fresh produce. And yeah, that definitely stuck with me.
Yeah, but there's just a lot of different classes. I could even like give you a list. It's just like completely different things.
What it sounds like is you guys are very aware of psychology first and foremost, but you're also very socially and culturally aware.
Yeah, you have to have the entire cultural context, and we try to, what's really nice about OU's approach is they try to do it as culturally and like yes, it's scientific based, but it's also trying to bring in as much cultural context as possible.
Mm-hmm. And besides your work in the classroom, do you do a whole lot of internships, or internships required for the major?
Yeah. So what you do is, first you're doing a 75-hour practicum.
Right.
So that's what I'm doing right now. We're on 50 hours. Got a few more left. But typically you would do that. Mine's a little different because I'm graduating in December. But typically you would be doing that during the school year. If you're able to afford to have it completely by itself and not with classes also, I highly recommend that you do it over the summer. But you can pick wherever you want to go. Like, you do not have to, if you are not living here over the summer, you can actually go off campus and do it as long as a supervisor signs off on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then your final thing you do is a 400-hour internship. So I like to think of it as education majors getting student teaching. So that's essentially what it is. You'll be working like full time with an agency of your choosing. We usually like strongly recommend that you do complete opposite internships. So your practicum should not be like your internship, and your internship should not be like your practicum.
Really?
And that's just so you can get a full range.
Mm-hmm.
So typically you pick your practicum as a population that you would like, in your mind, you're like, I never want to work with this population.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, children. So I picked it. And I actually really, really like it. And I'm really glad that I did it.
Mm-hmm.
So now for my internship, I'm interested in being a crime advocate at the homicide unit at Columbus PD. So that's completely different. But I'm also interested in working with veterans at the VA. So just try to get as much of a spectrum as you can, because you can write down these internships at many of these jobs and they'll appreciate just like the sheer amount of knowledge that you have.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I would have never thought to get like the opposite.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because then that really does give you the range, because
and also like the T is, if you end up not liking that population, it's only 75 hours and it's okay.
Right. And that's the great thing about like internships and practicums and things like that, is it's temporary. You can absolutely not go back if you choose to not go back. Besides internships and things like that, do you do any like student organizations or volunteering?
Yeah, so we actually have an organization. It's pretty new. It's called Bobcats for Children and Families. Mm-hmm. So they actually do events with different nonprofits here. So every year there's a thing called Kids Day, and if you're from OU, it's usually in the what's it called? The next to Peden. The thing. It's in the field house. That's the name. Walter Field House. That is the name.
Big open space.
So at Walter Field House, it's basically like a big kids event, and a lot, if not all of the nonprofits and like the children agencies are there. So we help set that up. We also do just like general fundraising for these orgs as well. Mm-hmm. And stuff like that. They're pretty new, which is actually like really valuable for people that want to get involved, because like since it's new, there's a lot of things that you can add and bring to it. Mm-hmm. So that's like the
Do you
biggest
know
one.
if there are similar organizations like at different schools?
So if you're from other schools, Child and Family Studies might not be called Child and Family Studies. I've heard it be called Family Science. That's the big one. Pretty sure OSU has something similar to that, and a lot of them do have organizations like this. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I could be totally wrong, but I'm pretty sure OSU calls it Family Sciences.
Right.
But I do know that they have an organization that is specifically helping. Like they do something with Buckeye Ranch, which is like a nonprofit up there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. So besides internships and classes, are there any other like requirements for the major? Typically there's not, but I always like to ask.
Yeah, I know. No, not really, but I strongly encourage you to get to know your professors. The professors here in general, mm-hmm. like biggest positive of the major is the fact that the staff is close. Mm-hmm. And they care about, I'm like talking about like for real, they care about you. Yeah. If they see that you feel like you're looking like you're not great, they will email you and ask you if you're okay. Mm-hmm. The CFS staff and students were very much like a community, and it's just really nice to have that kind of support. Like my advisor, Professor Mick, I can't call her Janine anymore, but Professor Mick, she's great because she helped me when I got into this major to like figure out what I wanted to do, and like literally from me starting to me about to be over, she made sure that my schedule was ready to go. She made sure that I was doing well, would check in on me. Like, they're, like, the most available people. Yeah. And also, like, in general, if you're interested in internships, I'm interested in grad school, and I asked Professor Mick about it. And she was like, oh, yeah, let's just sit down and look at grad schools. Like, oh, that's the kind of, like, availability. Because I know that a lot of the times, like, people want to do a major, and then they find out that the professors are, like, unavailable. Yeah. And, like, kind of like, oh, well, no, I'm good.
Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty exemplary of the field that you guys are in, that the professors are so, like...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like, they've spent their entire career, you know, focusing on people, and now they're professors, and they're focusing on their students. And ensuring their well-being. That's awesome.
Plus, like, in the major in general, like, we always preach, like, whether you're working with traumatized victims or if you're working with people in general, they're going to take a lot out of you because you have to be empathetic to be in this major. You have to be able to connect, and connection drains you.
Yeah.
So we've always practiced self-care. So these professors, I'm not saying you should skip class all the time, but like they're the most forgiving when you're just like, hey, I'm having like a really bad day.
Right.
And I just need to, like, they give you that kind of space where if you can't come, it's going to be okay. And they're not going to make a big deal about it.
Do you find any of the work that you've done so far, whether it's like in the classroom or like in an internship, do you find any of it draining?
I was shocked because when I went to the CAC, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be seeing like survivors of child sexual abuse. And I was like, how am I going to handle this? I'm going to come home and just want to sleep all day because I'm like, oh my God. But I haven't found it draining. I'm working with a client right now because she and I have similar like interests, and in general, she just seems to be really comfortable with me, which is really good. But I didn't want to listen to her interview until I got to know her. And when I listened to her interview, I thought I was going to be drained, but I was actually pretty okay. I mean, obviously it was horrible to hear what happened to her, but I think what made it I think what made it like okay is that afterwards, my supervisor and, well, I guess they're both my supervisors, they came over to me and they're like, hey, so let's unpack this.
Right.
So, it's draining if you don't find people that will like just unpack something with you. But this major and like this field in general, like helping professions in general, have those people that are like, okay, like I've had to do this. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been doing this for 40 years. Let's unpack this and let me know if you're okay. So yes, it's draining, but the people know that you're not the only one that knows that it can be draining.
Right.
So you get those people that will check on you. So far so good. We're doing it.
Let's see. We've mentioned a couple of times the social work thing.
Yeah.
How is a child and family studies major different than a social work major?
So the social work major is different because one, it's a licensure. Like at the end, you'll be a licensed social worker. But also there is like completely different. Like if you were to I went to a social work course because it was like one of the related courses. Like, like every major has like you have to take this many related courses.
Right.
It's very policy based. It's more these are like the rules that you have to follow. It was more like I don't know how to say this. Like it's very similar. Like they're both helping professions. It's just social work has a lot of like, this is what you have to do with this and this is what you have to do with that. Like do.
Okay.
Rather than,
so it's more rules based.
And that's just because it's licensed. Like you have to follow these. I mean, I'm not saying that we all like CFS majors don't have to be ethical. That's like not what I mean. I'm just saying like that's what's taught for social work majors first because like they're getting a license for that. But CFS majors, it's much more like working with a family. And I have to say, like, CFS majors do typically work more. It's not just a singular client. Like, at the CAC, yes, we work with the survivor of sexual abuse, but there's also a lot of interaction with the family.
Right.
And when you have someone when you have a social worker that's like on a case, it could be that their caseload is just like ridiculous, and it's nice to have that CFS professional that's like, well, I can also talk to the family, or I can also help the family, so they can focus on the client, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So how do you if somebody wants to pursue the field?
Oh yeah.
How do they choose which one that they want to do? Social work versus CFS?
I chose. Okay, so I'll just use like my experience because I'm going to grad school and it's kind of like the same kind of thing. So, a lot of the jobs that you can get as a social work major, you can get with a CFS major. The only reason that I'm going beyond a CFS degree and getting a social work master's is because I want to do counseling too.
Right.
So, you could still do that with a bachelor's in CFS. Like, you could totally do that. But I wanted to do it because I was interested in doing like independent casework. I'm interested in being like a case supervisor someday, stuff like that. I'm interested in that realm. So I I would still recommend getting a bachelor's in CFS because it's still much more, not much more. I don't want to poop on social work. I love social work. It's very family-based and strengths-based. And I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So choosing between social work and CFS, it was more like I want that license so that I can do counseling and so I can do other things if I get burnout. Because it's all about your burnout rate. Mm-hmm. That's what it's all about. Like, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into one career. Right. Especially in this profession, just because you don't know when something's going to reach too far home and when you're like, I have to step away.
Right. So. And I bet that's something that some people don't think about is like, how is this going to affect me? How is this going to bring up any past trauma, any past, incidences that I've faced? When is it going to hit too close to home?
Exactly.
Do you see that being an issue very much?
I feel like in the future it probably will happen, but that's just the nature of the job. Mm-hmm. It's all about personal and work balance. I don't think this will sound bad, but when I go home from my internship, professional Kennedy turns off. Right. I leave all that. I always like to say you should leave your work at the door. Otherwise, it's just going to follow you home. Right. It's going to hitch a ride. It's going to sit with you. If you find something that's going to, if you I guess if you were in a CAC, I'll use my example. And you hear something in an interview that's you're like, oh man, this really got to me because it either hit a chord with you from personal experience or just in general. It could have never happened to you and it just really hit you hard. Mm-hmm. Tell your supervisor. Don't hold it in. Don't be afraid to ask for professional help. A lot of these agencies, if you look it up, they actually recommend and would even, some agencies even pay for you to get counseling. Really? So, yeah. That's awesome. So, a lot of the agencies that are, especially the ones that are, federally or state funded, will actually pay for your counseling. Mm-hmm. So, don't be afraid. It's kind of weird, but, helping professionals are afraid to ask for help sometimes. Right. And it's totally fine for you to ask for help. And it's also okay to take a day and just tell your supervisor, hey, this interview, really got to me, or I'm not really feeling great. Can I just, I just need an hour, or I just need, a half day. And they will grant that to you. Mm-hmm. So, really, it's about, being real with yourself, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I've learned a lot about myself through this, major. I didn't think I would be able to handle the things I'm able to handle. But I also know when to step back and be okay, I acknowledge that this is how I feel, but I also need to make sure that I'm okay and I'm going to leave this at work. Mm-hmm. So
this sounds like a field that requires a lot of self-reflection.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of a weird question, but do a lot of people that go into this field also go to therapy? Because, everybody should go to therapy.
I mean, I would say probably at some point they would have to. I know that since I'm going into more super oh, I want to be in a trauma unit, blah blah right. blah, stuff like that. I'm probably gonna just in general have a counselor because I just want to make sure that it's all about being your best self for your client. Right. And I mean, if you let anything just sit, it's gonna bubble up to the top at some point. Right. So I would say it's common. It's still a bit stereotyped and stigmatized mm-hmm. for a helping professional, a counselor, to have their own counselor. Right. But at the same time, it's just a healthy thing to do for yourself. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to speak on behalf of helping professionals that I'm sure that a lot of them have counselors, because even if they don't admit it, I think that it's a very common thing.
Mm-hmm. And besides having that kind of self-reflection and taking care of yourself, throughout the work, do you have any other advice for people that are studying CFS?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to go down the rabbit hole of different things that you learn. There are so many things to gather and gain from this major, and the professors are literally vaults full of knowledge. Mm-hmm. For example, in stress and trauma, I can't tell you how many times I knocked on the door of Dr. Jansen's room because I was like, hey, I want to know more about this, or I want to learn more about PTSD. Don't be afraid to ask for more information, because they will give it to you. Like, they are all a wealth of knowledge, and they know that, and they know, like, what kind, like, where you're going out in the world. Like, they're like, you need to be ready for anything. And it's just so helpful to not be afraid to ask.
Yeah.
Like, in general. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And find your people.
Mm-hmm. So, I haven't found a great way to answer or to ask this question, but
it's okay.
What type of person majors in this? Like, what qualities does a person have that tend to do this?
Well, you need to be able to, like, be self-motivated. The content's really interesting, and you need to make sure that you are, like, wanting to learn it. Like, yeah, a lot of, like, some stuff will be dry. Some stuff you're going to be like, I already know this. Like, Piaget's stages of development. Like, you're going to relearn it. You're going to be like, oh, my God. But you need to be able to be like, you know, let's pull through. Let's keep going. Obviously, being empathetic rather than sympathetic. It's better to feel for someone than feel bad for someone.
Right.
Let me think. What else? Obviously you have to be responsible. I'm not organized at home, but I'm organized with my schoolwork and with my work, like my real work.
Yeah.
So as long as you're able to, like, actually do that and, like, be organized just within your own schoolwork and work. I'm not telling you to be, like, a super organized person in all facets of your life, but if you can keep everything together within your professional life, then that would be, like, A+. Awesome. You also have to be able to, like, be adaptable. The coursework usually doesn't move that much, but there's always a chance that your practicum site, you're not going to get the site that you want, and you need to be able to adapt to that and be okay with that. Thinking quick on your feet and being creative is awesome, because you might be put in a situation where you're like, oh, I know what, this is a story, this is not my story, but there was an alumni, she works at an agency right now, and she was at a meeting, and they were like, okay, we're going to talk about trauma-informed care. Does anybody know what it is? And she raised her hand. She was like, oh, in my CFS class, I took an entire class on that. And the supervisor was like, great, I'd like a PowerPoint presentation for tomorrow on trauma-informed care. And it's like, okay. So just, like, being ready for things like that in your job, like in your future job, and just in general, it's like, okay, we're going to do this thing that I've never done before.
Right. Oh my gosh.
But yeah, there's a lot of different personalities in there, but those are, like, a few of the traits that are pretty much, like, throughout.
So, you know, now that we've gone over Endgame and we've gone over what, you know, your college experience is going to look like, now the audience is sold and they want to major in CFS.
That'd be amazing.
How do they choose? Well, first of all, how do they choose what school they want to go to? What things should they look for?
Well, if you're able to visit, please do. Visit the staff. Make sure that they are, I don't want to say likable, but, like, they are approachable. That's a good word for that. Make sure that they're approachable. Make sure that they seem to be open to having you there for office hours. See how often their office hours are. That usually is a good indication of how busy they are or how often they can actually be there.
And that's something that I never even thought about before I was in college. I'm like, oh, that's whatever. Like, if they have regular office hours, that's fine. Or what? There's always email. But, like, now that I'm in it, I'm like, wow. I, like, truly do appreciate, you know, the professors who their door's always open. Or if the door's not open, you can FaceTime me or you can call me or whatever.
Yeah.
I've called professors before, and yeah, it's something to look out for, just for any major in particular. But yeah,
I would look at that, and I would also look at some, like, ask for a example course load and just see what the kind of classes they are, because some places are going to be strengths-based approach and others might be policy-based. So you really need to see which one that you want. I'm not saying that policy-based is, like, the wrong way to go, because obviously I got the strengths-based, so I literally don't know.
Right.
But some are going to be more inclined to be talking about like it's going to be less about working around the family and more of like a like kind of like a like social work, like this and this and this, and you know, there's not a lot of wiggle room. But you'll find that a lot of them are strengths based now, because that's a scientific, like there's like research behind like strengths based being like the best approach for working with children and families. Mm-hmm. But just in general, looking at the course load is like also just a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. Maybe see if they have a student org.
Yeah,
that's for the major. That's really helpful.
And a lot of those student orgs are, like, end up being the place where you learn the most.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I would say those are like the biggest things there. I would say look at requirements to get into the program, but I've noticed that a lot of times, like, it's just you don't have to do anything special to be in like a family science. You don't have to do anything crazy.
That was gonna be my next question. Is like, what's the application process? Is there like, do you have to have like a crazy good science ACT score or like anything weird like that?
No, I think like typically it's just like you just apply and that you pick your major and you're like, I want to be this, and that's the extent of it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much open to everybody, which is pretty cool, because like there's no like.
Literally the only one that I could see that probably does have a stipulation is if you want to be a child life specialist.
Right.
I think the minimum GPA is 3.0 to get in, and I think that's it. That's like the big one.
Because the thing with this particular major, and with a lot of the majors that like we've talked about before on the podcast, is there's no like one-to-one comparison to any of like the subjects that you'll be studying like in high school or take a test on the ACT, and it's not like a direct translation. It's not like, you know, you're majoring in English, so you have to get like this score on the English exam or whatever. So that makes it a little bit more complex. And then one other question I have is, should you go to school in the region that you want to work or live? Like if I'm from, you know, Central Ohio, if I wanted to work in Central Ohio still, but I wanted to have 4 years where I lived in Florida, can I do that, or should I stay where I want to work?
So I don't want to work in Ohio.
Yeah.
Let's just get that out of the way right now.
Yeah.
I would say you could, especially if it's a place you've never been. Mm-hmm. If it's like you've never lived there before, go for it.
Right.
Because they're going to have a completely different dynamic than here. Mm. But if you're in Ohio and you're like, I want to work in Columbus, I would recommend that you go to school in a rural area. You don't have to come here, obviously. I mean, you could. OU's great.
Yeah.
But go to like an opposite dynamic. So I want to work within a city at some point. My nonprofit that I'm interning for, it's 2 people.
Wow.
In the whole organization. In Columbus, it's like upwards of like 20 people at the CAC. Right. So just able to get like a completely different, like rural versus urban is huge. It's completely different. The way that families are structured, the way like the resources available, you really got to get both sides of the coin, if you will. Because that'll make you a better helping professional.
Yeah.
So I would recommend at least doing urban versus rural at your discretion.
That I would, again, that's like something I would never really think about, like doing the opposite. Because like, I don't know, in my mind, you know, you study exactly what you want to do, but then I guess that puts you in a hole and you don't get new experiences, and new experiences are good for you.
I mean, like at the beginning of this major, I would have never been this wise. So.
Right.
I'm very wise now.
Oh my God. All right. So do you have any other wisdom for us? Any questions that I didn't ask you that you think should be asked?
I would say just in general, if you pick this major, advocate for yourself. This is a really cool major, and you don't have to validate it to anyone. You'll get confused for social work. You'll get confused for a lot of different majors, but you are CFS and take pride in that. And we love you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on this podcast. It's been an absolute treat. Thank you guys so much for listening to Let's Find Your Major. You can email us any questions or suggestions at letsfindyourmajor@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter at FindYourMajor, and we are on Instagram now at FindYourMajor. If you want to follow me specifically, you can follow me on Instagram at Danny Clarkson, DANNICLARKSON, or you can follow me on Twitter at NotReallyDanny. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'll see you next time.